In a world scarred by the echoes of war, healing often comes from the most unexpected sources. This story unfolds at a remote Montana ranch, where a battle-hardened Marine veteran, haunted by the shadows of combat, encountered a wild Mustang that would challenge everything he knew about recovery. What began as a chance meeting between two wounded souls transformed into an extraordinary journey that would touch the hearts of thousands. Prepare yourself for a testament to the profound power of connection, redemption, and the unspoken language of healing. The Broken Arrow Ranch lay nestled in the rugged foothills of Montana's Absaroka Range, its weathered fences stretching across acres of untamed wilderness where the wind whispered through tall prairie grass. For Marcus Davidson, a 34-year-old former Marine Force recon operator, this isolated sanctuary had become both his refuge and his prison. 3 years had passed since his medical discharge, but the weight of his experiences in Afghanistan still clung to him like a shadow, heavier than the titanium prosthetic that had replaced his left leg below the knee. The ranch house stood as a testament to resilience, its log walls bearing the scars of countless Montana winters. Marcus had inherited the property from his grandfather, a World War II veteran who had always said the mountains had a way of healing troubled souls. Now, in the pre-dawn silence of a crisp autumn morning, Marcus sat on the worn wooden porch, his calloused hands wrapped around a steaming cup of black coffee, watching the first hints of sunlight paint the eastern sky in shades of amber and rose. The morning ritual had become his anchor in a world that often felt like it was spinning out of control. The nightmares still came, vivid recreations of the IED explosion that had taken his leg and the lives of two of his closest friends. The memories would jolt him awake in the dark hours before dawn, leaving him with no choice but to seek solace in the quiet solitude of the ranch's early hours. Dr. Rachel Torres, his VA psychiatrist, had encouraged him to find purpose in the daily routines of ranch life. Structure helps rebuild what trauma tears down, she would say during their weekly video sessions. Marcus had taken her words to heart, throwing himself into the physical demands of maintaining the property. The work kept his hands busy and his mind focused, even if it couldn't completely silence the echoes of war that still reverberated through his thoughts. The ranch's isolation suited Marcus. Here, he didn't have to explain the way he sometimes froze at unexpected noises or why crowds made his skin crawl. The nearest town, Silver Creek, was 30 miles away, and his only regular visitor was Hannah, his younger sister, who made the drive from Bozeman twice a month to check on him and restock his supplies. She worried about him living alone, but Marcus had convinced her that the solitude was what he needed. That morning, as Marcus watched the sun climb higher in the sky, something caught his attention on the distant ridge. A small herd of wild Mustangs had appeared, their silhouettes stark against the brightening horizon. The sight wasn't unusual in this part of Montana. Wild horses still roamed these hills, descendants of those that had escaped from Spanish explorers centuries ago. Marcus often saw them passing through his land, keeping their distance from the ranch buildings. Among the herd, one horse stood apart from the others, a powerful buckskin stallion with a distinctive white blaze that ran like lightning down its face. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the way it moved with a slight irregularity, favoring its right hind leg. The detail caught his attention, a warrior recognizing another's battle scar. He watched as the stallion separated itself from the herd, moving with deliberate steps down the ridge. Marcus set his coffee cup down, his military training kicking in as he assessed the situation. Wild Mustangs rarely approached the ranch buildings, preferring to stay on the outer reaches of the property. Yet this one seemed different, its behavior breaking from the usual patterns. The other horses remained on the ridge, grazing peacefully, while the buckskin continued its solitary descent. Standing slowly, Marcus reached for his crutch. He hadn't put on his prosthetic yet, preferring the freedom of early mornings without it. The movement caught the stallion's attention, but instead of spooking, it paused, its ears pricked forward with interest. In that moment, as their eyes met across the distance, Marcus felt something he couldn't explain. A recognition, perhaps, or a challenge. The morning light had strengthened, illuminating the stallion's coat in shades of gold and revealing old scars that marked its flanks. Marcus could see now that the injury to its hind leg was an old wound, long healed, but still affecting its gait. The horse moved with the careful deliberation of one who had learned to adapt to permanent damage, a feeling Marcus knew all too well. Time seemed to slow as the stallion approached, each step measured and purposeful. Marcus remained absolutely still, his breathing steady, using the same patience he had learned during long hours of reconnaissance missions. The horse stopped about 30 feet from the porch, its nostrils flaring as it tested the air. Its eyes, dark and intelligent, remained fixed on Marcus. For several minutes, neither moved. The only sounds were the soft whisper of wind through the grass and the distant calls of morning birds. Marcus felt his usual hypervigilance fade, replaced by a strange sense of calm. The stallion's presence demanded nothing, judged nothing. It simply was, existing in that moment with a purity that cut through the complicated layers of human trauma. Hannah's truck appeared on the horizon, the distant rumble of its engine breaking the spell. The stallion's head snapped up, but instead of bolting, it took several steps backward, maintaining its gaze on Marcus. Only when the truck drew closer did it finally turn, moving with its distinctive gait back toward the herd on the ridge. Marcus watched it go, aware that something significant had just occurred, even if he couldn't quite name what it was. Hannah found him still standing on the porch, his coffee gone cold beside him. "You okay?" she asked, noting his distant expression. Marcus nodded, his eyes still tracking the buckskin stallion as it rejoined its herd. "I just saw something interesting," he said quietly, unsure how to explain the connection he had felt with the wounded wild horse. As Hannah unloaded groceries and supplies, Marcus found himself repeatedly glancing toward the ridge. The herd had moved on, disappearing into the vast landscape, but the image of the buckskin stallion remained vivid in his mind. That night, for the first time in months, his dreams were not filled with explosions and gunfire, but with the quiet strength he had seen in those dark eyes. The encounter marked a subtle shift in Marcus's daily routine. Each morning, he found himself looking toward the ridge, searching for the distinctive silhouette of the buckskin stallion. He began spending more time on the porch, something Hannah noticed during her next visit. "You seem different," she observed, studying her brother's face. "More present." Marcus shrugged, but he couldn't deny that something had changed since that morning with the Mustang. Dr. Torres noticed the change too during their next session. "You're talking about the future," she pointed out, "not just surviving the present." Marcus hadn't realized it, but she was right. Since the Mustang's visit, he had started making plans, Small ones at first, like fixing the old corral that had fallen into disrepair, but plans nonetheless. The fog of depression that had surrounded him for so long seemed to be thinning, allowing glimpses of possibility to shine through. A week after the first encounter, Marcus woke before dawn to find the buckskin stallion standing alone near the broken corral. The sight made him pause, his hand instinctively reaching for his prosthetic leg propped against the bedside table. The morning air held the crisp bite of early autumn as he made his way onto the porch, moving with the careful precision that had become second nature since losing his leg. The stallion's head lifted at his appearance, ears swiveling forward with recognition. In the pale pre-dawn light, its coat gleamed like burnished gold, the white blaze on its face stark against the darker fur. Marcus noticed fresh scratches along its flank, telling tales of recent confrontations, perhaps with other stallions, or the dangers that lurked in the wilderness. The horse's injured leg seemed stiffer today, causing it to shift its weight more noticeably. Without fully understanding why, Marcus began to talk, his voice rough from disuse. "Rough night?" he asked, noting how the stallion's ears twitched at the sound. "Yeah, me too." The words felt strange in his mouth. He'd grown accustomed to silence, speaking only when necessary during Hannah's visits or his sessions with Dr. Torres. But something about the Mustang's steady gaze invited conversation. Marcus lowered himself to sit on the porch steps, a move that would have made him feel vulnerable around most people. The stallion watched him, its dark eyes reflecting an intelligence that seemed to look straight through his carefully constructed walls. "You know," Marcus continued, "my grandfather used to say that animals can sense things about people that we can't see ourselves." The horse took a tentative step closer, its movement causing Marcus to still. He remembered his training about wild animals. No sudden movements, no direct challenges. But this felt different from any wildlife encounter he'd experienced before. The stallion's approach seemed deliberate, almost cautious, as if it too was working through its own wariness. Time stretched like honey as the Mustang gradually closed the distance between them. Marcus found himself talking about Afghanistan, about the day the IED had torn through his Humvee, about the friends he'd lost. Words that had stayed locked inside him for years flowed freely in the presence of this silent listener. The stallion's ears remained focused on his voice, its body language relaxed despite its alert posture. When the horse was just a few yards away, Marcus slowly extended his hand, palm up. It was a gesture that went against every survival instinct he'd developed in combat, making himself vulnerable, offering trust. The stallion stretched its neck, nostrils flaring as it caught his scent. Its breath was warm against his palm, and for a moment Marcus felt the walls he'd built around his heart begin to crack. The sound of a distant coyote broke the spell, causing the stallion to startle. But instead of fleeing, it merely took a few steps back, maintaining visual contact with Marcus. He let his hand drop, understanding the delicate nature of this newfound trust. "It's okay," he murmured. "We've got time." The horse remained for several more minutes before finally turning to leave, its distinctive gait carrying it back toward the hills. Later that morning, during his video session with Dr. Torres, Marcus found himself sharing the encounter. "It's like looking in a mirror sometimes," he admitted, surprising himself with the observation. The way it moves with that old injury, the wariness in its eyes. But there's this strength there too. Dr. Torres leaned forward, her interest evident, even through the screen. "Sometimes," she said carefully. "We need to see our own resilience reflected back at us to truly recognize it." The conversation stayed with Marcus as he worked through his daily tasks. The ranch demanded constant attention. Fences needed mending. Equipment required maintenance, and winter preparations couldn't be ignored. Yet he found himself working with renewed purpose, frequently glancing toward the hills for any sign of the buckskin stallion. Hannah arrived that afternoon, earlier than her usual schedule. She found Marcus repairing the corral, his movements more fluid than she'd seen in months. "You're looking better," she observed, helping him carry lumber from her truck. Marcus nodded, describing his morning encounter with the Mustang. Hannah listened intently, noting the animation in her brother's voice that had been missing for so long. "Maybe it's not just coincidence," she suggested, watching Marcus measure a board for cutting. "Remember those programs they talked about at the VA? The ones using horses to help veterans?" Marcus had dismissed such programs before, unwilling to expose his struggles to others. But now, with the memory of the stallion's quiet presence still fresh, he found himself considering the possibility. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the ranch, Marcus researched equine therapy programs on his laptop. The stories he found resonated deeply. Veterans finding healing through connections with horses, building trust and rediscovering themselves in the process. He thought about the buckskin stallion, how its own injuries hadn't diminished its spirit, and felt something stir inside him that he hadn't experienced since before the explosion. Hope. The next morning brought heavy fog, shrouding the ranch. In a ghostly white veil, Marcus stood on the porch, coffee in hand, straining to see beyond the mist. A shape emerged from the whiteness, the buckskin stallion, moving through the fog like a spirit. This time, it approached with less hesitation, drawn perhaps by the grain Marcus had scattered near the corral. As the horse drew closer, Marcus studied its injuries more carefully. The old wound on its hind leg appeared to be from a mountain lion attack, judging by the pattern of scarring. Yet the Mustang had survived, adapted, and continued to lead its herd. "You're one tough son of a gun," Marcus murmured admiringly. The stallion's ears pricked at his voice, and it moved close enough for Marcus to see the flecks of gold in its dark eyes. Without conscious thought, Marcus began to sing softly, an old Marine Corps cadence that had once helped him push through grueling training marches. The stallion's reaction surprised him. It stilled completely, head slightly cocked, listening. For several minutes, Marcus continued to sing, his voice growing stronger with each verse. The horse remained motionless, as if transfixed by the rhythm of the words. When he finally fell silent, the stallion took another step forward, bringing it within arm's reach. Marcus held his breath as the horse lowered its head, gently brushing its muzzle against his outstretched hand. The touch was electric, sending a shiver of connection through him that brought unexpected tears to his eyes. In that moment, the weight of his trauma felt lighter, shared somehow with this wild creature that had known its own battles. The fog began to lift as the sun climbed higher, revealing the distant mountains in patches of clarity. The stallion stayed longer than ever before, allowing Marcus to study the intricate patterns of its scars, each one a story of survival. He found himself talking again, sharing memories not just of the explosion, but of the brotherhood he'd known in the Marines, the sense of purpose he'd lost, and the isolation he'd chosen in its place. As morning fully arrived, bringing with it The usual ranch sounds of wind and birdsong, the stallion finally turned to leave. But this time, it paused at the edge of the corral, looking back at Marcus with what seemed like invitation in its gaze. Marcus understood somehow that this wasn't goodbye. It was a promise to return. He watched the horse disappear into the grassland, its golden coat catching the sunlight like a beacon of hope against the vast Montana sky. That afternoon, Marcus made a decision. He called Dr. Torres and asked about incorporating equine therapy into his treatment plan. "I'm not ready for group sessions," he explained, "but I think I've found my own way to start." He told her about the buckskin stallion, about the connection they'd formed, and about the strange sense of peace he felt in its presence. Dr. Torres listened thoughtfully before suggesting they work together to develop a plan that would build on this natural bond. The days that followed took on a new rhythm at Broken Arrow Ranch. Every morning, Marcus would wake before sunrise, his nightmares gradually giving way to anticipation of the stallion's visits. He began setting out fresh water and small amounts of grain, creating a quiet ritual that helped anchor his days. The buckskin, which he'd started calling Warrior, now appeared regularly at dawn, its powerful presence becoming as constant as the mountains themselves. One particularly crisp morning, as frost crystallized on the fence posts, Marcus noticed something different about Warrior's approach. The stallion moved with unusual urgency, its head held high and nostrils flared. When it reached the corral, instead of stopping for the grain, it paced restlessly, turning to look back toward the hills. Marcus followed its gaze, but saw nothing in the dim light. "What is it, boy?" he asked softly, recognizing the signs of agitation from his own experiences with hypervigilance. Warrior's ears swiveled toward his voice, but its attention remained fixed on the distance. Then Marcus heard it, a faint sound carrying on the wind, something between a whinny and a cry of distress. Without hesitation, he went inside to grab his rifle, medical kit, and the prosthetic leg he'd modified for rough terrain. Following Warrior's lead, Marcus made his way into the foothills. The stallion moved ahead, but kept looking back, ensuring he followed. The behavior reminded him of his K-9 unit partners in Afghanistan, and he found himself instinctively trusting the horse's guidance. After 20 minutes of careful navigation, through the rugged landscape, they crested a small rise, and Marcus understood Warrior's concern. In a shallow ravine below, a young Mustang lay trapped, its leg caught between two rocks. The horse's coat was dark with sweat, evidence of its long struggle to free itself. Marcus recognized it as one of the younger members of Warrior's herd, probably no more than 2 years old. The buckskin stallion descended first, approaching the trapped horse with gentle nickering sounds that seemed to calm its panic. Marcus watched in amazement as Warrior positioned himself between him and the injured horse, as if facilitating the rescue. Drawing on his combat medical training, Marcus assessed the situation. The young Mustang's leg wasn't broken, but the rocks had created a deep gash that needed attention. The real challenge would be freeing it without causing further injury or spooking it into hurting itself more. "Easy there," Marcus murmured, keeping his voice steady as he approached. The injured horse's eyes rolled with fear, but Warrior's presence seemed to help it stay relatively calm. Using techniques he'd learned in Force Recon for moving quietly over rough terrain, Marcus made his way closer. His own prosthetic leg made the descent challenging, but years of adaptation had taught him to work with his limitations rather than against them. The rescue took over an hour of careful maneuvering. Marcus used his combat knife to widen the space between the rocks slightly, talking constantly in low, soothing tones. Warrior remained nearby, occasionally touching noses with the younger horse when its fear threatened to overwhelm it. Finally, with a combination of leverage and gentle coaxing, Marcus managed to free the trapped leg. The young Mustang scrambled to its feet, initially favoring the injured leg, but showing no signs of serious damage. Marcus quickly cleaned and dressed the wound with supplies from his medical kit, grateful that the horse remained surprisingly cooperative. Throughout the process, Warrior stood guard, his presence a calming influence on both the injured horse and Marcus himself. As he worked, Marcus found himself reflecting on the parallels to his time as a combat medic. The focus required, the need to stay calm under pressure, the satisfaction of helping another being in distress. It all felt familiar, but without the accompanying trauma of warfare. This was healing of a different kind, pure and uncomplicated by human conflict. Once the young horse was treated, it rejoined the herd that had gathered at a safe distance. Warrior remained behind, watching Marcus with what seemed like newfound respect. The connection between them had shifted somehow, deepened by their shared purpose in the rescue. As they made their way back to the ranch, the stallion stayed closer than ever before, matching its pace to Marcus's irregular gait. Hannah arrived later that afternoon to find her brother more animated than she'd seen him in years. The story of the morning's rescue poured out of him, complete with gestures and detailed descriptions that reminded her of the way he used to tell stories before the war. "You should have seen it, Hannah," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "The way Warrior led me there, how he helped keep the young one calm. It was like he knew exactly what needed to be done." His sister listened intently, noting the way Marcus moved with renewed confidence, the shadow of isolation that had haunted him seeming lighter somehow. "You know," she said carefully, "this reminds me of what Dad used to say about Grandpa after he came back from the Pacific, how working with horses helped him find his way back to himself." The comparison struck Marcus deeply. He'd always felt the weight of his grandfather's legacy at Broken Arrow Ranch. But now it took on new meaning. Perhaps the old man had known something about healing that couldn't be found in VA hospitals or therapy sessions, something about the honest, unflinching connection between humans and horses. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Marcus sat on the porch with his laptop, researching equine-assisted therapy programs for veterans. He found himself particularly drawn to articles about wild Mustang rehabilitation programs, where veterans worked with horses that had their own trauma and trust issues to overcome. The parallels to his growing bond with Warrior were impossible to ignore. During his next session with Dr. Torres, Marcus shared the story of the rescue. She listened intently, noting the increased animation in his voice and body language. "What you're describing," she said thoughtfully, "is exactly what we hope to achieve with formal equine therapy. The horse becomes a mirror, helping veterans reconnect with parts of themselves they've walled off, but you found this connection naturally, which is remarkable." The validation from Dr. Torres strengthened Marcus's growing conviction that his encounters with Warrior were more than just chance. The stallion had become a bridge between his military past and his civilian present, helping him access emotions and memories he'd locked away after the explosion. The horse's own injuries and resilience provided a living example of how to carry on despite permanent scars. As darkness settled over the ranch, Marcus heard the distinct sound of hoofbeats approaching. Using his phone's flashlight, he illuminated the yard to find Warrior standing near the corral, its coat silver in the artificial light. It was unusual for the stallion to visit after dark, and something about its presence felt significant. Marcus made his way down the porch steps, drawn by an instinct he couldn't explain. The night air was cool and still as Marcus approached the horse. Warrior remained motionless, its eyes reflecting the flashlight's beam like ancient pools of wisdom. Without hesitation, Marcus reached out and placed his hand on the stallion's neck, feeling the strong pulse beneath his palm. The touch felt like completing a circuit, connecting him to something larger than himself, something that transcended the boundaries between wild and tame, broken and whole. In that moment, under the vast Montana sky filled with stars, Marcus felt a shift in his understanding of healing. It wasn't about erasing the past or pretending his injuries didn't exist. It was about finding strength in vulnerability, about recognizing that sometimes the deepest connections come from sharing our wounds with another soul who understands them without words. The morning air carried the first hints of winter as Marcus prepared the corral for Warrior's visit. He'd begun keeping a daily log of their interactions, noting the stallion's behaviors and responses. The documentation reminded him of mission reports, but these entries held a different kind of purpose. Tracking healing rather than combat operations. Each morning, the bond between them grew stronger, marked by small victories and moments of quiet understanding. Word of Marcus's unusual connection with the wild Mustang had begun to spread through the small veteran community in Silver Creek. James Cooper, a former Army Ranger who ran the local hardware store, mentioned it during one of Marcus's supply runs. "I heard you've got a special visitor up at Broken Arrow," he said, helping load fence posts into Marcus's truck. "My son Tommy can't stop talking about the wild horse with the lightning mark on its face." The comment caught Marcus off guard. He hadn't realized people were talking about Warrior. Yet as he drove back to the ranch, he found himself thinking about the other veterans in the area, many of whom struggled with their own battles against PTSD, depression, and physical injuries. The thought stayed with him as he unloaded supplies, his mind wandering to possibilities he hadn't considered before. That afternoon, Warrior appeared earlier than usual, approaching the corral with steady confidence. The stallion's gait had improved slightly over the weeks, though the old injury would never fully heal. Marcus watched as it navigated the uneven ground, admiring how the horse had adapted to its limitations without letting them define its existence. The parallel to his own journey wasn't lost on him. As Marcus worked on reinforcing the corral fence, Warrior stayed nearby, occasionally nickering softly when he spoke. The horse's presence had become so natural that Marcus found himself sharing thoughts he'd never voiced aloud before. "You know," he said, securing a post, "I used to think being strong meant handling everything alone. Funny how wrong we can be about things like that." Hannah arrived unexpectedly, bringing news that would set unexpected events in motion. "I met someone at the VA center in Bozeman," she said, helping Marcus organize his tools. "A Marine named Mike Sullivan. He lost both legs in Syria. He's having a really tough time adjusting." She hesitated before continuing. "I told him about you and Warrior. He seemed interested in visiting." Marcus's initial reaction was resistance. The ranch was his sanctuary, and the thought of sharing it made him uneasy. But as he watched Warrior grazing peacefully nearby, he remembered how the stallion had led him to help the injured young horse. Perhaps there was a larger purpose to this unexpected connection he'd found. After careful consideration and consultation with Dr. Torres, Marcus agreed to meet with Mike. The younger Marine arrived on a clear morning, his wheelchair navigating the gravel driveway with practiced ease. Marcus recognized the look in his eyes, the same mixture of pain, anger, and isolation he'd seen in his own reflection countless times. "I appreciate you having me out here," Mike said, his voice carrying the forced casualness of someone trying to mask their discomfort. "Your sister says you've got quite a story with this wild horse." Marcus nodded, leading him toward the corral where Warrior usually appeared. "It's not so much my story," he replied, "as something we're figuring out together." As if on cue, Warrior appeared on the ridge, its silhouette proud against the morning sky. Mike watched in silence as the stallion made its way down to the ranch, moving with the dignified grace that had first caught Marcus's attention. "Beautiful animal," Mike murmured, his hands gripping his wheelchair's arms tightly. "But why would it choose to come here?" Marcus shared the story of his first encounter with Warrior, describing how the horse's own injury had created an unexpected bridge between them. As he spoke, the stallion drew closer, showing none of the wariness it typically displayed around strangers. Instead, it seemed curious about Mike, its ears forward and alert. To everyone's surprise, Warrior approached Mike's wheelchair directly, lowering its head to his eye level. The younger Marine sat perfectly still, his breath catching as the horse's soft muzzle brushed his hand. "They can sense things we can't," Marcus said quietly, remembering his grandfather's words. "Pain, fear, strength. It's all the same to them. They just see what's real." The visit lasted several hours, during which Mike gradually relaxed, sharing stories of his own struggles with recovery. Warrior remained nearby, its presence creating a space where difficult truths could be spoken without judgment. By the time Mike left, something had shifted in his demeanor. "Thank you," he said simply, but Marcus understood the depth behind those words. That evening, as Marcus documented the day's events in his log, he received a text from Hannah. Mike had called her, asking if he could return to the ranch. He said he felt more peace in those few hours than he has in the past year, she wrote. The message confirmed what Marcus had begun to suspect, that his connection with Warrior wasn't meant to remain private. Over the next few weeks, Marcus cautiously opened the ranch to other veterans. Word spread through the VA network, and soon he was hosting small groups of 2 or 3 visitors at a time. Each interaction was different, but Warrior seemed to understand its role, approaching those who needed connection most, maintaining a gentle presence that helped lower defensive walls. Dr. Torres supported the informal program, noting the therapeutic value for all involved. "What you've created here," she said during one of their sessions, "is something unique. It's not traditional equine therapy. It's something more organic, more primal. These veterans are connecting with a wild creature that chooses to be there, and that choice resonates deeply with their own healing journey." The transformation of Broken Arrow Ranch happened gradually. Marcus installed benches near the corral, creating comfortable spaces for veterans to sit and observe Warrior. He began keeping a journal of visitor interactions, noting how the stallion's presence affected different individuals. Some found peace in simply watching the horse move freely across the landscape, while others experienced powerful emotional breakthroughs in its presence. One morning, as Marcus watched a group of veterans sharing coffee near the corral. He realized that Warrior had given him something beyond his own healing, a renewed sense of purpose. The ranch had become a place where wounded warriors could find understanding and hope, not through formal therapy or prescribed programs, but through the simple, profound connection with a wild creature that had known its own battles. The stallions. Herd began spending more time in the valley near the ranch, creating an ever-changing backdrop of wild beauty. The younger horse that Marcus had helped rescue now approached the corral regularly, its healed leg a testament to the power of trust and care. Other veterans started bringing their families, and the sound of children's laughter became a common occurrence at Broken Arrow. As autumn deepened into winter, the transformation at Broken Arrow Ranch continued to unfold in unexpected ways. The first snow arrived early, blanketing the valley in pristine white that made Warrior's golden coat stand out like a flame against the monochrome landscape. Despite the harsh weather, the stallion's visits remained constant, though Marcus noticed it spending more time near the shelter of the barn. The growing community of veterans who visited the ranch had begun bringing improvements. Someone repaired the barn's roof. Another group helped install better lighting for the darker winter days. Mike Sullivan, now a regular visitor, had started documenting their experiences through photography, capturing moments of connection between Warrior and the wounded warriors who sought solace at Broken Arrow. One particularly cold morning, Marcus found himself sharing coffee with a small group of veterans in the newly winterized barn. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences when Warrior would appear in the doorway, steam rising from its nostrils in the frigid air. Through these informal gatherings, stories emerged, not just of trauma and loss, but of resilience and hope. Sarah Chen, a former Army combat medic who had lost her right arm in Iraq, spoke softly about her first encounter with Warrior. "It was like he knew exactly where to stand," she said, "always on my left side, making it easier for me to touch him. No human has ever shown that kind of intuitive understanding of my needs." Others nodded in recognition, each having experienced similar moments of inexplicable connection with the stallion. Dr. Torres had begun making monthly visits to the ranch, observing the informal therapy sessions that had organically developed. She watched as veterans who struggled with traditional counseling found their voices in Warrior's presence. The stallion's own visible injuries seemed to create a bridge, allowing them to acknowledge their wounds without shame. The local media eventually caught wind of what was happening at Broken Arrow. A reporter from the Bozeman Chronicle arrived one morning, hoping to document the unique program. Marcus initially hesitated, protective of the sanctuary they'd created, but the other veterans encouraged him to share their story. "People need to know there's hope," Mike insisted, "that healing can come from unexpected places." The article, when it appeared, was thoughtful and respectful. It described how a wounded Marine and a wild Mustang had created a space where other veterans could find their way back to themselves. The piece included Mike's photographs, striking images that captured the profound moments of connection between human and horse. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Letters and emails began pouring in from veterans and their families across the country. Many shared their own stories of struggling with PTSD, physical injuries, and the challenge of transitioning back to civilian life. The common thread in their messages was a hunger for the kind of authentic healing they saw happening at Broken Arrow. Marcus found himself facing a decision. The ranch had evolved from a private refuge into something larger, something that seemed to answer a deep need in the veteran community. With Hannah's help, he began exploring ways to formalize what they'd created while maintaining its essential nature. They consulted with experts in equine therapy, veteran services, and wildlife protection to develop a sustainable model. Warrior remained the heart of it all, his presence a constant reminder that some of the most profound healing comes not from formal programs, but from genuine connection. The stallion seemed to understand its role, displaying an almost supernatural ability to sense which veterans needed its attention most. Those who visited the ranch often spoke of feeling seen by the horse in a way they hadn't experienced since their injuries. During one particularly powerful session, a young veteran named David, who had lost both arms in an explosion, sat quietly in his wheelchair as Warrior approached. The stallion gently rested its head on David's shoulder, remaining still as tears began to flow down the young man's face. "I haven't let anyone this close since my injury," David whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The moment crystallized everything the ranch had become, a place where vulnerability was strength and wounds could be acknowledged without words. Winter's grip on the valley brought new challenges. The herd needed additional feed to supplement. The snow-covered grass and keeping the ranch accessible required constant work, but the veterans who had found healing there pitched in without being asked. They organized work parties, cleared paths, and ensured that Warrior and its herd had everything they needed to thrive in the harsh Montana winter. The stallion's own injury seemed to trouble it more in the cold, its gait becoming stiffer on particularly frigid days. Marcus consulted with a veterinarian who specialized in wild horses, learning exercises and techniques to help ease the animal's discomfort. The process of caring for Warrior's old wounds helped many veterans confront their own physical challenges with new perspective. Local businesses began offering support, donating supplies and materials to help maintain the ranch. The hardware store where James Cooper worked provided building materials at cost, and a feed store in Silver Creek regularly contributed grain and hay. The community's embrace of the program showed how the healing happening at Broken Arrow rippled outward, touching more lives than Marcus had ever imagined possible. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Marcus sat with Dr. Torres in the barn office, reviewing the impact of their unconventional program. "What you've created here," she said, gesturing to the wall of photographs showing veterans with Warrior, "goes beyond traditional therapy. You've shown that healing doesn't always follow a prescribed path. Sometimes it gallops in on 4 legs and chooses its own way." The truth of her words was evident in the growing collection of stories they'd gathered. Veterans who had isolated themselves for years were now regular visitors to the ranch, finding community among others who understood their struggles. Physical injuries that had once seemed like insurmountable barriers became mere aspects of their stories, not their defining features. Marcus watched through the window as Warrior moved through the snowy paddock, its breath creating clouds in the cold air. The stallion's journey from wild wounded creature to healing presence mirrored his own transformation from isolated survivor to community builder. Both had found purpose in their pain, turning their scars into bridges that others could cross. The depth of winter brought an unexpected challenge to Broken Arrow Ranch. One bitter January morning, Marcus woke to find Warrior standing at the corral in obvious distress. The stallion's breathing was labored, its injured leg trembling under its weight. The sight sent a jolt of fear through Marcus. In all their months together, he'd never seen the proud Mustang so vulnerable. Without hesitation, he called Dr. Emily Parker, the veterinarian who had been consulting on Warrior's care. She arrived within an hour, her truck cutting through the fresh snow that had fallen overnight. The preliminary examination revealed that the cold had aggravated the old injury, causing inflammation that threatened to permanently damage the healing that had occurred. "He needs intensive care," Dr. Parker explained, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Daily treatments, controlled movement, and shelter from these extreme temperatures." She paused, knowing the implications of her words. "Marcus, we need to bring him into the barn. It's time to make a decision about whether to fully domesticate him." The suggestion hit Marcus like a physical blow. Warrior's wild nature had been central to its healing power. The fact that it chose to connect with the veterans rather than being forced to. The thought of confining the stallion, even for its own good, felt like a betrayal of everything they'd built. The other veterans who had gathered at the ranch that morning watched the scene unfold with concern. Mike wheeled himself closer to Warrior, reaching out to stroke the horse's neck. "What makes this place special isn't just that he's wild," Mike said thoughtfully. "It's that he chooses to trust us despite being wild. Maybe now it's our turn to prove worthy of that trust." Sarah Chen stepped forward, her experience as a combat medic lending weight to her words. "Sometimes healing means accepting help, even when it goes against our nature. We all learned that the hard way." She looked meaningfully at her missing arm. "Warrior taught us that. Maybe now he needs to learn it too." Marcus stood in silence, watching as the stallion shifted uncomfortably, clearly struggling with its injury. The other horses from the herd had gathered on a nearby ridge, as if sensing something significant was about to happen. Their presence reminded Marcus of all the times Warrior had chosen to leave them to help a struggling veteran find peace. With careful movements, Marcus approached the Mustang. "I know you don't understand the words," he said softly, "but you understand intent. We want to help you just like you've helped us." Warrior's ears swiveled toward his voice, its dark eyes fixed on his face with that uncanny intelligence that had first drawn them together. The process of leading Warrior into the barn took hours of patient coaxing. The stallion's trust in Marcus, warred with its instinct for freedom, each step a negotiation between wild and tame. Other veterans stayed to help, creating a quiet, calm environment that helped ease the horse's anxiety. Dr. Parker had brought specialized equipment to treat the inflammation, including therapeutic ultrasound and infrared heat therapy. She showed Marcus and several other veterans how to administer the treatments, knowing that Warrior would respond better to familiar hands. The stallion remained surprisingly cooperative, as if understanding that these uncomfortable procedures were meant to help. Hannah arrived with supplies to convert part of the barn into a comfortable recovery space for Warrior. She'd brought fresh straw, extra blankets, and heating lamps to combat the bitter cold. As they worked to prepare the area, she noticed tears in her brother's eyes. "You're doing the right thing," she assured him, understanding his conflict. "Sometimes love means making hard choices." The first night Warrior spent in the barn was difficult for everyone. The stallion's distress at being confined was evident, though it made no attempt to escape. Marcus slept on a cot nearby, wanting to be close in case anything went wrong. Throughout the night, he talked softly to the horse, sharing stories of his own struggle to accept help after his injury. By morning, something had shifted. Warrior seemed more settled, allowing Dr. Parker to examine its leg without resistance. The other veterans who arrived to help with treatments were met with the same gentle acceptance the stallion had always shown. Even confined, Warrior maintained its extraordinary ability to sense and respond to their emotional needs. Word of Warrior's situation spread quickly through the veteran community. Those who had found healing at Broken Arrow Ranch began organizing themselves into care teams, ensuring someone was always available to help with treatments and keep the stallion company. They created a schedule that provided round-the-clock support while respecting the quiet, peaceful atmosphere that made the ranch special. The forced proximity brought new dimensions to Warrior's interactions with the veterans. Unable to maintain physical distance, the stallion found other ways to establish boundaries and communicate its needs. Those who spent time with Warrior during this period spoke of deepening their understanding of trust and vulnerability. Dr. Torres made an unscheduled visit to observe how the situation was affecting both the veterans and their equine healer. She found an atmosphere of focused purpose, with former soldiers applying their military discipline to Warrior's care while processing their own emotions about seeing their strong, wild friend in a weakened state. This is a powerful metaphor for their own recovery journeys, she noted during a quiet conversation with Marcus. Learning when to surrender to help, understanding that accepting care isn't the same as losing yourself. These are crucial lessons that many veterans struggle with. Warrior is teaching them in a new way now. As January gave way to February, Warrior's condition began to improve. The inflammation subsided and the stallion's movement became more fluid. Dr. Parker was pleased with the progress, but cautioned against returning Warrior to the wild too quickly. The bond you've all formed during this time is remarkable, she observed, but we need to be patient with the physical healing. The other horses from Warrior's herd continue to appear on the ridge each morning, maintaining their connection to their leader. Marcus often found the stallion standing at the barn door, nickering softly to its family. These moments were bittersweet, highlighting the sacrifice Warrior was making by accepting their help. One particularly cold evening, as Marcus performed the last treatment of the day, he noticed something remarkable. Despite its confinement, Warrior's eyes held the same wild spirit that had first drawn them together. The stallion hadn't been diminished by accepting help. If anything, its dignity and strength seemed enhanced by this demonstration of trust. The experience changed something fundamental in the ranch's approach to healing. Veterans who visited began sharing more openly about their own struggles with accepting help, inspired by Warrior's example. The stallion's temporary vulnerability created new conversations about strength, independence, and the courage it takes to let others in. As February's harsh grip began to loosen, Warrior's recovery progressed steadily under the dedicated care of the veteran community. The stallion's strength returned gradually, each day bringing small but significant improvements. Dr. Parker's regular checkups confirmed what everyone could see. The proud Mustang was healing, not just physically, but adapting to a new way of being that balanced its wild nature with trust in human connection. The barn had become a gathering place for healing of all kinds. Veterans who previously struggled to speak about their experiences found themselves opening up during the quiet hours of Warrior's treatment sessions. The stallion's silent presence created a space where difficult truths could emerge without judgment, where vulnerability was met with understanding rather than pity. One evening, as Marcus adjusted the heating lamp in Warrior's stall, a young veteran named Thomas shared a breakthrough moment. "You know what I realized," he said, his hands steady as he measured out medicine for the horse's leg. "Before my injury, I thought asking for help meant I was weak. Watching Warrior accept care while staying true to himself, it's changed how I see things." The transformation of the ranch continued despite the winter weather. Local contractors, many of them veterans themselves, volunteered their time to winterize more of the buildings. They installed better heating systems, reinforced walls against the bitter Montana winds, and created more comfortable spaces for visitors to gather. The improvements were practical, but they also symbolized something deeper: the evolution of Broken Arrow from a private sanctuary to a true community. Dr. Torres had begun documenting the unique therapeutic approach that had developed organically at the ranch. "What's happening here goes beyond traditional equine therapy," she explained during one of her visits. "The combination of Warrior's wild nature, the veteran-led community, and the absence of formal clinical structures, it's creating something entirely new." The documentation process revealed patterns that even Marcus hadn't fully recognized. Veterans who spent time caring for Warrior during its recovery showed marked improvements in their own healing journeys. The act of helping the stallion seemed to bypass many of the psychological barriers that had hindered their progress in traditional therapy settings. Sarah Chen, who had become one of Warrior's most dedicated caretakers, found herself developing new ways to work around her physical limitations. "When you're focused on helping someone else heal," she observed, "you stop seeing your own injuries as obstacles and start viewing them as challenges to overcome." Her innovative approaches to handling medical equipment with one arm inspired other veterans to adapt their own methods of managing daily tasks. Mike Sullivan's photography project had evolved as well. His images now captured not just moments of connection between veterans and Warrior, but the entire ecosystem of healing that had developed at the ranch. Each photograph told a story of transformation, veterans working together, supporting each other, finding new purpose in the act of caring for a creature that had once been completely wild. The other horses from Warrior's herd maintained their vigil on the ridge, their daily appearances becoming part of the ranch's rhythm. Marcus noticed how the stallion would prick its ears at their arrival, maintaining its leadership role even from within the barn. The young horse that Warrior had once led him to rescue now seemed to be acting as a liaison between the herd and their confined leader. As Warrior's strength returned, Dr. Parker began incorporating more movement into its recovery routine. The veterans created a protected exercise area where the stallion could move freely while staying sheltered from the worst of the weather. Watching Warrior's careful, determined steps during these sessions reminded many of their own physical therapy journeys. Hannah, who had been documenting everything for potential expansion of the program, noticed a significant pattern. "The veterans who struggle most with their own recovery," she observed, "are often the ones who connect most deeply with Warrior during these exercises. It's like they recognize something of themselves in his determination." The news of Warrior's recovery and the unique healing environment at Broken Arrow Ranch had spread beyond Montana. Veterans organizations from other states began reaching out, asking about the possibility of establishing similar programs. Marcus found himself facing questions about the future he hadn't dared to consider before. One particularly cold afternoon, as snow fell softly outside the barn, a group of veterans gathered to discuss the ranch's future. The conversation was thoughtful, measuring the desire to help others against the need to preserve what made Broken Arrow special. Warrior stood in its stall, ears forward, seeming to listen as they talked about expanding while maintaining the essential spirit of what they'd created. It's not just about the programs or the facilities, Mike pointed out, his wheelchair positioned near Warrior's stall. It's about this feeling, this understanding that healing doesn't have to follow anyone else's rules. We need to protect that, even as we grow. The others nodded in agreement, each having experienced the unique power of the ranch's approach. Dr. Parker's latest assessment of Warrior's condition brought both hope and new challenges. The stallion's leg had healed well enough for increased activity, but the question of its eventual return to the wild loomed large. The bond between Warrior and the veteran community had deepened during its recovery, creating connections that would be difficult to sever completely. Marcus spent long hours contemplating the best path forward, often sitting with Warrior late into the night. The stallion's presence had always helped him think more clearly, and now he needed that clarity more than ever. The decision wasn't just about Warrior's physical well-being, it was about honoring the spirit of what they'd created while ensuring its sustainability. The other veterans shared their thoughts freely, each bringing their own perspective to the discussion. Some argued for creating a permanent sanctuary where Warrior could continue its healing work while maintaining connections with its herd. Others believed that the stallion's eventual return to full freedom was essential to the power of its example. During one of these discussions, Sarah Chen made a point that resonated deeply with everyone. Maybe it's not about choosing between wild and tame, she suggested, watching Warrior move about its stall with growing confidence. Maybe it's about creating a new way of being, where freedom and connection aren't mutually exclusive. The idea took root, sparking conversations about how to evolve the ranch's approach. They began exploring ways to create protected spaces where Warrior could move freely between its wild family and the healing work that had become its calling. The solution would require careful planning and resources, but the veteran community was committed to finding a way forward that honored both aspects of Warrior's nature. As March approached, bringing hints of spring to the Montana Valley, the question of Warrior's future became increasingly pressing. The stallion's recovery had progressed remarkably well, its movements now showing little sign of the winter's setback. During its daily exercise sessions, the proud Mustang displayed the same powerful grace that had first caught Marcus's attention, though tempered now with a new kind of awareness that came from months of close human interaction. Dr. Parker's final assessment confirmed what everyone had hoped. Warrior had regained full strength in its injured leg. Physically, there's nothing holding him back now, she explained during a gathering of the core group of veterans who had been instrumental in the horse's recovery. The question isn't about capability anymore. It's about what's best for both Warrior and the community that's formed around him. The discussion that followed lasted well into the evening, with veterans sharing their perspectives on how to move forward. The barn, which had become their de facto meeting space, held a comfortable warmth against the lingering winter chill. Warrior stood in its stall, ears moving between speakers as if following the conversation about its future. Mike Sullivan, who had been documenting the entire recovery process through his photography, presented a compelling argument. "Look at these images," he said, projecting a series of photographs on the barn wall. "You can see the evolution, not just in Warrior's healing, but in how he interacts with everyone. It's like he's found a way to be both wild and connected at the same time. The photographs told a powerful story. Early images showed the cautious distance Warrior had maintained, even while helping veterans heal. Later shots captured moments of intimate connection during its recovery. The stallion allowing veterans to treat its injury, sharing quiet moments of understanding, offering comfort even while confined. The most recent pictures showed something else entirely. A magnificent creature that moved with the freedom of its wild nature while choosing to maintain the bonds it had formed. Sarah Chen, who had been researching similar programs across the country, shared her findings. Most equine therapy programs use domesticated horses, she explained. What we have here is unique. A wild Mustang that chooses to participate in healing while maintaining its essential nature. We need to find a way to preserve that choice. The solution began to take shape through a series of collaborative discussions involving the veteran community, wildlife experts, and Dr. Torres. They envisioned creating a protected corridor that would allow Warrior to move freely between the wild spaces where its herd roamed, and the ranch where its healing work had such profound impact. Local ranchers, who had initially been skeptical of the program, now offered their support. James Cooper organized a group of neighboring landowners who agreed to maintain safe passages for the Mustang herd across their properties. "What's happening at Broken Arrow isn't just about veterans or wild horses," he said during a community meeting. "It's about healing something deeper in all of us." The plan required significant modifications to the ranch itself. The veterans, drawing on their various skills and experiences, began designing improvements that would support Warrior's dual nature. They expanded the protected exercise area into a larger natural enclosure that would allow the stallion to remain connected to its herd while still being accessible to those seeking healing. Hannah's organizational skills proved invaluable as they developed protocols for this new approach. She worked with Dr. Torres to create guidelines that would protect both the veteran's need for therapeutic interaction and Warrior's need for freedom. The key, she emphasized, is maintaining the organic nature of these connections while ensuring everyone's safety and well-being. The young horse that Warrior had once helped rescue became an unexpected part of the solution. Now fully recovered, it had developed its own connections with the ranch, often leading other members of the herd closer to the therapeutic spaces. Marcus watched with amazement as a natural pattern emerged. The herd would graze within sight of the ranch, maintaining their wild status while allowing Warrior to move between both worlds. As spring began to soften the landscape, the time came to test their new approach. On a clear morning, with the sun casting long shadows across the valley, Marcus and a small group of veterans gathered to open the gates that had protected Warrior during its recovery. The stallion stood at the threshold, its powerful body tensed with anticipation. "This isn't goodbye," Marcus said softly, more to himself than the others. "It's just a new chapter." Warrior's ears flicked toward his voice, and for a moment their eyes met with the same profound understanding that had marked their first encounter. Then, with fluid grace, the stallion stepped out into the morning light. What happened next astonished everyone. Instead of immediately running to join its herd, Warrior moved deliberately around the ranch's expanded boundaries, investigating the new spaces that had been created. It approached each veteran present, touching noses or offering gentle nudges, as if acknowledging their role in its journey. Throughout that first day of freedom, Warrior remained within sight of the ranch, gradually moving further out, but repeatedly returning to check in. The other horses from the herd ventured closer, creating a fluid dynamic that seemed to reflect the balance they'd hoped to achieve. By sunset, it became clear that their vision of a middle path between wild and tame was possible. The impact of this new approach became evident in the weeks that followed. Veterans arriving at the ranch found themselves witnessing something remarkable. A wild Mustang that chose to participate in their healing while maintaining its freedom. The power of this voluntary connection, of being chosen rather than controlled, added a new dimension to the therapeutic experience. Dr. Torres observed that the veterans' responses to this evolution were profound. Seeing Warrior move freely between its wild family and its role as a healer seems to help them integrate their own different identities, she noted. They're learning that being changed by experience doesn't mean losing yourself. It means growing into something more complex and complete. The ranch's documentation of this unique approach attracted attention from both veterans services and wildlife conservation groups. They had created something unprecedented, a therapeutic environment that respected and incorporated the wild nature of its key participant. Marcus found himself fielding inquiries from organizations interested in learning from their experience. One particularly meaningful moment came when a group of Native American veterans visited the ranch. Their traditional understanding of the relationship between humans and wild creatures offered new perspectives on what they'd created. "You haven't tamed this spirit," an elder told Marcus as they watched Warrior move between the herd and the therapeutic spaces. "You've learned to dance with it." The success of their approach led to discussions about expanding the model to other locations. However, Marcus and the core group of veterans remained committed to maintaining the intimate, organic nature of what they'd built. They began developing guidelines for other ranches interested in creating similar programs, emphasizing the importance of allowing these connections to develop naturally rather than trying to force them. Spring continued to transform the valley, bringing new growth and possibilities. The veteran community at Broken Arrow Ranch evolved alongside their unique program, each person finding their own way to contribute to its success. Some focused on working directly with visiting veterans, while others maintained the ranch's facilities or documented their growing understanding of this special form of healing. One serene morning in late spring, the ranch received an unexpected visitor who would help cement its legacy. Colonel James Richardson, a high-ranking official from the VA's Therapeutic Programs Division, arrived unannounced. He had heard about the unprecedented success of Broken Arrow's approach and wanted to witness it firsthand. Marcus found himself leading the colonel toward the expanded natural enclosure where Warrior often chose to spend its mornings. The timing proved perfect. Warrior had just returned from being with its herd and was greeting some of the regular veterans. The stallion's presence created the same atmosphere of calm focus that had become characteristic of these sessions. Colonel Richardson watched in silence as a young veteran with severe burn scars worked through his physical therapy exercises. Next to the Mustang, drawing strength from its steady presence. "I visited every major equine therapy program in the country," the colonel said quietly, observing how Warrior moved between the veterans with deliberate care. "But I've never seen anything quite like this. The fact that this horse chooses to be here, that it maintains its wild nature while forming these connections, it's remarkable." The colonel's visit extended from the planned morning observation into a full day of discussions with the veteran community. He sat in on informal therapy sessions, spoke with Dr. Torres about their documentation of the program's impact, and reviewed Mike Sullivan's extensive photographic record of their journey. What struck him most was the organic way the program had developed, growing from one unexpected connection into something that defied conventional therapeutic categories. Sarah Chen led a presentation about their approach to integrating new veterans into the program. "We don't force interactions or schedule specific times with Warrior," she explained. "The connection has to develop naturally, just as it did with Marcus. Sometimes that means someone might spend days just watching from a distance before they're ready for closer contact." The success stories spoke for themselves. Veterans who had struggled with traditional therapy programs showed remarkable progress after spending time at the ranch. The combination of Warrior's unconditional acceptance, the support of fellow veterans, and the absence of rigid clinical structures created an environment where healing could unfold at its own pace. Mike wheeled himself to the front of the group, sharing his own transformation through a series of self-portraits taken over the months. The earliest images showed his isolation and pain clearly etched on his face. Later photographs captured moments of connection with Warrior, each one revealing more openness and hope. The final image, taken just the previous week, showed him working with a new veteran, his expression peaceful and purposeful. Colonel Richardson's attention was particularly drawn to the way the program had evolved to support different types of trauma. Combat veterans with PTSD found comfort in Warrior's hypervigilance and steady presence. Those struggling with physical injuries drew inspiration from the stallion's adaptation to its own old wound. Veterans dealing with isolation connected with the way Warrior balanced independence with community. During a quiet moment in the afternoon, the colonel shared his own experience as a veteran struggling with the transition to civilian life. "What you've created here," he said, watching Warrior graze peacefully near a group of veterans, "goes beyond therapy. You've built a model for healing that honors both the wounds and the warrior spirit." The discussion turned to the possibility of expanding the program's impact without losing its essential nature. The colonel understood their reluctance to simply replicate the program elsewhere, recognizing that the unique bond between Warrior and the veteran community couldn't be manufactured or forced. Instead, they explored ways to share their insights and support other communities in finding their own paths to healing. As the day progressed, more veterans arrived at the ranch, each drawn by the sanctuary they'd found there. A former Navy corpsman worked with Hannah to organize supplies for the evening's group dinner. 2 Army veterans repaired fencing while discussing their latest therapy sessions. The scene illustrated how the ranch had become more than a treatment facility. It was a living community of healing. The natural enclosure they'd created allowed Warrior to move freely between its roles as wild Mustang and healing presence. The stallion's herd often grazed within sight, creating a constant reminder of the balance between independence and connection. This visible link to Warrior's wild family added another layer of meaning to the therapy, showing veterans that maintaining connections to their military past didn't mean they couldn't build new identities. Dr. Torres shared their research on how the program affected different aspects of recovery. Veterans showed improved sleep patterns, reduced anxiety, and greater willingness to engage in community activities. The presence of a wild Mustang that chose to connect with them seemed to bypass many of the trust issues that had hindered their progress in traditional therapy settings. The documentation included stories of breakthrough moments that happened during the most unexpected interactions. One veteran found his voice again while singing an old military cadence to Warrior during a thunderstorm. Another finally processed his grief while helping treat the stallion's injury during its winter recovery. Each story illustrated the unique ways healing could manifest when given the space to emerge naturally. The impact extended beyond the veterans themselves. Families reported significant improvements in their relationships as their loved ones began to open up and reconnect. The ranch had become a place where children could see their parents smile again, where spouses could understand the nature of their partner's struggles through the metaphor of Warrior's journey. Local community support had grown stronger as the program's success became evident. Restaurants in Silver Creek took turns providing meals for the veterans' gatherings. The hardware store organized regular supply drives. High school students volunteered to help with ranch maintenance, learning valuable lessons about service and healing in the process. As evening approached, the colonel witnessed one of the ranch's most powerful traditions. Veterans gathered in a circle near the natural enclosure, sharing stories of their journeys while Warrior moved among them, sometimes stopping to offer gentle contact to those who needed it most. The stallion's presence seemed to create a space where difficult truths could be spoken without fear of judgment. The transformation of Broken Arrow Ranch from a private refuge to a revolutionary healing community had happened organically, each step guided by the needs of both the veterans and their wild healing partner. The program's success challenged traditional notions of therapy, suggesting that sometimes the most profound healing comes not from clinical interventions, but from authentic connections that honor both wounds and wisdom. James Cooper arrived as the sun was setting, bringing news that more neighboring ranchers wanted to participate in maintaining safe passages for Warrior's herd. The community's embrace of the program demonstrated how the healing happening at Broken Arrow rippled outward, touching lives far beyond the veterans who directly participated in the therapy. Dr. Parker's latest visit confirmed that Warrior continued to thrive in its dual role. The stallion's old injury had stabilized, and its overall health reflected the success of their balanced approach. The veterinarian noted how the horse's choice to maintain connections with both its wild family and the veteran community seemed to contribute to its well-being. Colonel Richardson's visit marked a turning point for Broken Arrow Ranch. Following his glowing report to the VA, interest in their unique program expanded dramatically. Marcus and the core group of veterans found themselves facing both opportunities and challenges as they worked to preserve the essence of what they'd created while sharing its benefits with a wider community. The arrival of summer brought longer days and new possibilities to the ranch. The natural enclosure bloomed with wildflowers, creating an even more welcoming space for both Warrior and the veterans who sought healing there. The stallion's herd had settled into a pattern of grazing nearby, seemingly understanding their role in this unique arrangement. One particularly memorable morning, Marcus watched as Warrior introduced a new foal to the therapeutic space. The young horse, barely a month old, stayed close to its mother, but showed the same fearless curiosity that characterized its herd leader. The veterans present that day spoke of how the sight of new life thriving under Warrior's protection gave them hope for their own renewal. Dr. Torres had begun formal research into what she called the warrior effect, the unique combination of factors that made their program so successful. Her preliminary findings suggested that the voluntary nature of the interactions, combined with the peer support among veterans and the wild Mustang's innate wisdom, created an environment where deep healing could occur naturally. The documentation process revealed patterns they hadn't consciously recognized. Veterans who struggled most with trust issues often made their breakthrough moments during dawn sessions, when Warrior would return from its nightly wanderings with the herd. Something about witnessing the stallion's consistent choice to return resonated deeply with their own journey toward connection. Sarah Chen's work with female veterans highlighted another dimension of the program's impact. There's something powerful about connecting with a creature that embodies both strength and gentleness, she explained during a group session. Warrior shows us that vulnerability and power can coexist. That's especially meaningful for women who've served in combat roles. The ranch's success attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Wildlife conservation groups became interested in how Broken Arrow had managed to create a sustainable model of interaction between wild and domestic spaces. The sight of Warrior's herd moving freely through protected corridors while maintaining peaceful contact with human activities challenged traditional assumptions about wildlife management. Mike Sullivan's photography project evolved into a traveling exhibition titled Wild Healing. His images captured the essence of their program, the delicate balance between freedom and connection, the moment-to-moment choice to engage with healing, the profound impact of unconditional acceptance. The exhibition helped spread awareness of their work while raising funds for program expansion. Hannah's organizational skills proved crucial as they developed guidelines for other facilities interested in establishing similar programs. We can't replicate exactly what happened here, she emphasized during planning sessions. Each location needs to find its own path, its own warrior. What we can share is the fundamental principle of allowing healing to emerge naturally through genuine connection. The summer months brought an increase in family participation at the ranch. Veterans who had found healing through their connection with Warrior began bringing their children and spouses to share in the experience. The sight of families reconnecting in the presence of the wild Mustang added another layer of meaning to their work. One particularly touching moment occurred when a veteran's young daughter, who hadn't spoken since her father's injury, began talking to Warrior. The stallion stood quietly as the child whispered her fears and hopes, offering the same gentle presence that had helped so many adults find their voice again. The father later shared that this breakthrough had opened the door to healing for their entire family. The ranch's approach to integration of new veterans continued to evolve. They discovered that allowing people to observe Warrior's interactions with others often helped them process their own readiness for connection. Some spent weeks just watching from the shade of the barn before feeling prepared to enter the therapeutic space. As their program grew, they maintained their commitment to letting each veteran find their own path to healing. Some connected instantly with Warrior, while others formed stronger bonds with members of its herd. The presence of multiple wild horses, each with their own personality and story, created more opportunities for meaningful connection. Dr. Parker's regular visits confirmed the success of their balanced approach to Warrior's care. The stallion's physical health remained excellent, and its comfort moving between wild and therapeutic spaces seemed to increase with time. She noted how the horse's natural leadership abilities had adapted to include its role in the healing community. The expanding influence of their program caught the attention of wildlife researchers who began studying how warriors' modified behavior affected the larger ecosystem of wild horses in the region. They observed how the stallion's ability to bridge the gap between wild and domestic spaces was creating new patterns of interaction between humans and Mustangs throughout the valley. Sarah Chen worked with these researchers to document the broader implications of their discoveries. We're seeing evidence that trauma recovery doesn't have to be limited to clinical settings, she reported during a presentation to visiting mental health professionals. These horses are showing us that healing can be a natural, community-wide phenomenon that crosses species boundaries. The ranch's success with veteran rehabilitation led to an invitation to present their findings at a major conference on alternative therapy approaches. Marcus, initially hesitant to leave the ranch, found himself sharing their story with an audience of healthcare professionals and military personnel. The response was overwhelming, with many experts recognizing the revolutionary nature of their organic, animal-led approach to healing. Hannah's organizational skills proved crucial as they began developing frameworks to share their insights with other facilities. The key, she emphasized during planning sessions, is understanding that you can't force these connections. Every location needs to find its own natural bridges between the wild and healing spaces. Her guidelines focused on creating environments where similar relationships could develop organically. Mike Sullivan's photography continued to capture the evolving story of Broken Arrow Ranch. His latest series focused on the interactions between Warrior's herd and the wider community, documenting moments of unexpected connection that occurred far from the ranch's therapeutic spaces. These images help people understand how their program's influence had grown beyond its original scope. The arrival of new veterans at the ranch took on additional meaning as they witnessed not just warriors' healing presence, but the transformed behavior of the entire herd. Those struggling with isolation found hope in seeing how one being's journey toward connection could influence an entire community. The Mustang's adapted behavior became a living metaphor for the possibility of change while maintaining one's essential nature. Dr. Parker's regular veterinary visits now included observing the health patterns of the entire herd. She noted how the reduced stress levels in the horses, stemming from their improved relationship with humans, had led to better overall physical condition. The success of their program was literally visible in the gleaming coats and confident movements of the wild Mustangs. The ranch's approach to integration continued to evolve as they learned from each new interaction. Veterans who arrived with severe trust issues often found their first connections through observing the herd's natural behavior from a distance. The sight of wild horses choosing to engage with humans while maintaining their freedom spoke to something deep in those struggling to rebuild relationships after trauma. James Cooper and other local supporters helped establish a network of protected corridors connecting various healing spaces throughout the valley. These pathways allowed the Mustangs to move freely between wild areas while maintaining access to human interaction, creating a model for conservation that balanced preservation with therapeutic access. The Native American elders who had become regular visitors to the ranch shared ancestral stories about the relationship between horses and human healing. Their traditional knowledge added depth to the ranch's understanding of how to maintain the delicate balance between wildness and connection. Their insights helped shape the program's evolution in ways that honored both the Mustang's freedom and their healing role. Colonel Richardson's initial support led to increased interest from military leadership in understanding the broader applications of their approach. The success of Broken Arrow Ranch challenged conventional wisdom about both veteran rehabilitation and wildlife management, suggesting new possibilities for addressing multiple challenges through integrated solutions. The changing dynamic between the Mustangs and the local community led to unexpected developments in regional wildlife policy. Traditional approaches to managing wild horse populations were reconsidered in light of the positive outcomes observed. Around Broken Arrow Ranch, the possibility of creating similar therapeutic zones in other areas gained traction among conservation experts. As autumn approached, the ranch began preparing for another season of growth and adaptation. The veteran community worked together to expand their facilities while maintaining the natural character that made their program unique. New sheltered observation areas were constructed, allowing year-round access to the healing presence of the Mustang herd. During one particularly memorable evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Marcus sat with a group of veterans watching Warrior lead its herd through their evening routine. The stallion's movement still carried the same proud independence that had first drawn them together, but now it was paired with a conscious choice to maintain connection with the healing community that had grown around it. The successes at Broken Arrow Ranch began attracting international attention, with delegations from other countries visiting to learn from their experience. The sight of wild Mustangs choosing to participate in human healing while maintaining their freedom resonated across cultural boundaries, suggesting universal truths about the nature of recovery and connection. Dr. Torres's research expanded to include studying how the program's influence affected the broader community. She documented improved relationships between ranchers and wild horse populations, reduced conflict over land use, and increasing instances of spontaneous healing interactions between Mustangs and people in need throughout the region. The natural evolution of their program challenged traditional distinctions between wild and domestic, between therapy and natural healing. The Mustang's ability to move fluidly between these worlds demonstrated the possibility of maintaining authentic nature while engaging in profound connection with others. This model offered hope for addressing other seemingly intractable conflicts between conservation and human needs. Several veterans who had found healing through the program began establishing similar initiatives in other locations, always guided by the principle that such connections must develop naturally rather than being forced. Their experiences at Broken Arrow Ranch provided a foundation for understanding how to create environments where healing relationships could emerge organically. The story of Broken Arrow Ranch reached a profound milestone one crisp autumn morning, when Marcus stood on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the valley in shades of gold and amber. 5 years had passed since that first encounter with Warrior, and the transformation that had begun with one wounded Marine and a wild Mustang had grown into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. The ranch had evolved into a beacon of hope for veterans across the country, its unique approach to healing challenging traditional therapeutic models while producing remarkable results. Yet despite its growth and success, the heart of the program remained unchanged. The profound connection between humans and horses, wild and tame, broken and whole. Warrior's presence remained central to everything they had built. The stallion's daily choice to bridge the gap between its wild family and the healing community had inspired countless veterans to find their own path toward recovery. Its visible scars and powerful spirit continued to remind everyone that strength and vulnerability could coexist, that asking for help didn't mean surrendering freedom. On this particular morning, as Marcus sipped his coffee and reviewed the day's schedule, he noticed something extraordinary. Warrior was leading its entire herd, including several new foals, down from the hills toward the ranch's therapeutic spaces. The sight of wild Mustangs choosing to approach the healing grounds as a family unit demonstrated how completely their program had transformed traditional boundaries between wild and domestic spaces. Dr. Torres arrived early, carrying fresh research, data that confirmed what they had witnessed anecdotally. Veterans who participated in their program showed significantly higher recovery rates compared to traditional therapeutic approaches. More importantly, these improvements proved sustainable, with participants maintaining their progress long after leaving the ranch. The natural, organic nature of their healing model seemed to create deeper, more lasting changes than conventional therapy alone. Sarah Chen had developed a comprehensive documentation system that tracked not just clinical outcomes, but the subtle, profound ways their program affected participants' lives. "It's not just about managing symptoms," she explained during a staff meeting. "We're seeing fundamental shifts in how these veterans view themselves and their place in the world. The Mustangs show them that you can be changed by experience without being diminished by it." Mike Sullivan's photography project had grown into a traveling exhibition that toured veteran centers nationwide. His images captured the essence of their work. The moment a hardened warrior's defenses crumbled in the presence of wild grace, the quiet triumph of a first touch, the joy of reconnection with family members in the presence of the healing herd. Each photograph told a story of transformation that helped others understand the power of their approach. The ranch's influence had spread far beyond its original scope. Other facilities began adopting elements of their model, always guided by the core principle that healing connections must develop naturally rather than being forced. The veteran community at Broken Arrow helped establish guidelines for these programs, emphasizing the importance of allowing each location to find its own unique path while maintaining the essential spirit of their approach. Hannah's organizational skills had proven crucial in managing the ranch's expansion while preserving its intimate personal nature. She developed systems that allowed them to accommodate more veterans without losing the quiet, peaceful atmosphere that made their program special. The waiting list for participation grew longer each month, but they remained committed to maintaining the quality and authenticity of each interaction. James Cooper and the local community's support had evolved into a sustainable network of resources that helped ensure the ranch's future. Businesses throughout the region contributed supplies. Neighboring ranchers maintained safe passages for the Mustang herd, and volunteers helped with daily operations. The program had become woven into the fabric of the community, creating a model of how military and civilian populations could support each other's healing. Dr. Parker's latest veterinary assessment of Warrior and its herd revealed another dimension of their program's success. The Mustangs showed remarkably low stress levels despite their regular interaction with humans, and their overall health exceeded that of other wild herds in the region. The balance they had struck between freedom and connection seemed to benefit the horses as much as the veterans they helped heal. The Native American elders, who had become integral to their program, shared ancient wisdom about the healing relationship between horses and humans. Their traditional knowledge helped deepen understanding of how to maintain the delicate balance between wildness and connection. Their insights guided the program's evolution in ways that honored both the Mustangs' freedom and their role in human healing. Colonel Richardson's early support had led to increased recognition from military leadership. The success of Broken Arrow Ranch challenged conventional wisdom about both veteran rehabilitation and wildlife management, suggesting new possibilities for addressing multiple challenges through integrated solutions. Their approach had begun influencing policy discussions about how to better serve veterans while protecting natural resources. As Marcus watched the morning's activities unfold, he reflected on how far they had come from those first uncertain days. Veterans who had once struggled to leave their homes now moved confidently through the ranch's spaces, helping newcomers find their way. Families that had been fractured by trauma were rebuilding connections in the presence of the healing herd. The sound of laughter mixed with the gentle nickering of horses created a symphony of recovery that filled the valley. The natural enclosure had grown into a series of connected spaces that allowed for different types of interaction between veterans and Mustangs. Some areas provided quiet observation points where new participants could watch the herd from a distance. Others offered more intimate settings for one-on-one connections. The design reflected their understanding that healing happens at its own pace and takes many forms. Dr. Torres's research had expanded to include studying the long-term impact of their program on both veterans and their families. Her findings suggested that the benefits of their approach extended far beyond individual recovery, creating ripple effects that strengthened entire communities. The presence of the wild Mustangs seemed to facilitate healing connections not just between humans and horses, but among people themselves. The success of their model had begun attracting international attention. Delegations from other countries visited regularly, seeking to understand how they had created such an effective bridge between wildlife conservation and human healing. The sight of wild Mustangs choosing to participate in therapy while maintaining their freedom resonated across cultural boundaries, suggesting universal truths about the nature of recovery and connection. Sarah Chen's work with female veterans had revealed unique aspects of their program's impact on women who had served in combat roles. The Mustang's combination of strength and gentleness helped these veterans reconcile different aspects of their identity, finding ways to honor both their warrior spirit and their need for connection. Their experiences added important perspectives to the program's evolving approach. As autumn painted the landscape in brilliant colors, the ranch prepared for another season of growth and adaptation. The veteran community worked together to winterize facilities while maintaining the natural character that made their program unique. New observation areas were constructed with materials that blended seamlessly into the environment, allowing year-round access to the healing presence of the Mustang herd. The evening brought a gathering of veterans, families, and supporters to celebrate another year of transformation at Broken Arrow Ranch. As twilight settled over the valley, Warrior led its herd in a graceful circuit of the therapeutic spaces, moving with the fluid confidence that had inspired so many to find their own path to healing. The sight of wild Mustangs choosing to join this celebration of recovery demonstrated how completely their program had transformed traditional boundaries between nature and nurture. Marcus shared stories of their journey, remembering the wounded Marine who had first encountered a wild Mustang on this very ground. He spoke of the courage it takes to reach out for help, the wisdom of animals who see past our defenses, and the healing that becomes possible when we allow ourselves to be both strong and vulnerable. His words resonated with those gathered, each person recognizing their own story in the larger narrative of transformation that had unfolded at Broken Arrow Ranch. The legacy of their work had begun to take root in ways they never expected. Veterans who found healing through their program carried its lessons into their communities, creating new opportunities for connection and recovery. The Mustang's example of maintaining freedom while choosing connection inspired approaches to other challenges facing both human and animal populations. Their story had become a testament to the power of allowing healing to emerge naturally through authentic relationship. As night fell over the ranch, stars emerging in the vast Montana sky, the sound of horses moving through the valley merged with the quiet conversations of those whose lives had been transformed by this unique approach to healing. The future held new challenges and opportunities, but the foundation they had built, the profound connection between warriors both human and equine, would continue to light the way forward for others seeking their own path to recovery. The legacy of Broken Arrow Ranch and the extraordinary bond between warrior and the veteran community continues to inspire hope and healing across the nation. The wild Mustang who chose to become a healer while maintaining its freedom shows us that the deepest connections often come from the most unexpected places. Marcus still starts each day watching the sunrise from his porch, often joined by other veterans who have found their way back to life through this unique sanctuary. Warrior's herd, now larger and including many young horses who have never known fear of humans, moves freely between the wild spaces and healing grounds, creating a living example of how nature and nurture can work in harmony. The story of a wounded Marine and a wild Mustang has transformed into a movement, changing how we think about healing, freedom, and the profound connections possible between all living beings. Through their example, we learn that sometimes the greatest strength lies in choosing to trust, in remaining wild while opening our hearts to others. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who believes in the healing power of unexpected connections. Together, we can spread hope and inspire more stories of transformation and recovery.